Long before cities, long before farms, long before writing, metal, or the idea of history itself, there was ice, vast sheets of it, slow, heavy, silent. They crept across continents the way night creeps across a quiet valley. And for tens of thousands of years, the earth was colder than anything most of us could imagine today. The forests shrank, the oceans fell. Wind carried dust across wide, empty plains. This was the Ice Age. It was not a single winter that lasted too long. It was a long chapter of Earth's story. A time when glaciers spread across huge parts of the northern world and reshaped the land itself. In places like northern Europe and Canada, ice towers rose more than a kilometer thick. They pressed down on the land with unimaginable weight. Mountains cracked, rivers changed course. Entire ecosystems vanished beneath frozen silence. Many animals did not survive. Some disappeared slowly. Others vanished almost suddenly, leaving only scattered bones buried beneath layers of ancient soil. Whole species that had once roamed widely simply faded out of existence. Giant ground sloths, massive saber-toothed cats, huge herds of ancient megafauna. The Ice Age was not kind. Yet one species remained, a fragile one, really, not especially strong, not especially fast, not covered in thick fur like mammoths or musk oxen. Humans. Small groups of people scattered across the landscapes of Africa, Asia, and eventually Europe. At first glance, they did not seem built for such a world. Their skin was thin, their bodies modest, their survival uncertain. And yet, they endured. They endured through blizzards, through bitter winters, through landscapes that often looked more like frozen deserts than the Earth we know today. How? That question has fascinated scientists for generations. Because when we look back at the Ice Age, we see something unusual. Many powerful animals disappeared, creatures far larger than humans, creatures with claws, tusks, armor, and strength. But humans remained, not just surviving, expanding, moving across new lands, crossing frozen plains, learning, adapting, inventing. Slowly, almost quietly, they became one of the most resilient species the planet had ever seen. But the story does not begin with clever tools or heroic discoveries. It begins much earlier, in a world that was already changing. A world where temperatures were falling little by little over thousands of years. At first, the shift was subtle. A few colder winters, a few glaciers expanding high in mountain valleys, forests thinning in places where they had once been dense. Animals began to migrate, plants began to shift their ranges, and early humans, living mostly in Africa at the time, probably noticed very little at first. Their lives followed ancient rhythms, hunting, gathering, watching the seasons change. The sun rose and set as it always had. Rivers flowed. Grasslands stretched toward the horizon. But Earth's climate was already beginning one of its great transformations. A slow cooling, driven by tiny shifts in the planet's orbit, changes in ocean currents, and subtle variations in sunlight reaching the surface. These changes happen quietly. No thunder, no sudden catastrophe, just a gradual tightening of winter's grip. Over thousands of years, glaciers grew. They crept down from polar regions. They filled mountain valleys. They pushed slowly southward. Imagine standing on a plain and watching a wall of ice approach, not over days or weeks, but over centuries. Generation after generation noticing the same slow change. The winters a little longer, the summers a little shorter, the animals moving differently, the land itself becoming colder. Some human groups would move away from these shifting climates. Others would adapt, and adaptation would become humanity's greatest advantage. But adaptation did not happen instantly. It was not a single brilliant invention. It was thousands of small discoveries, a sharper stone, a warmer shelter, a better way to share food, small improvements that slowly added up. If you could walk across Ice Age landscapes, you would see a world that felt both familiar and strange. Wide plains stretched across northern continents. But instead of forests, much of this land was covered in something scientists call the mammoth steppe, a cold grassland, dry, windy, open. In summer, grasses would grow low and tough. In winter, snow drifted across endless fields. Herds of animals moved through these plains. Woolly mammoths, huge, shaggy giants with curved tusks sweeping outward like enormous crescents. Woolly rhinoceroses, massive creatures with thick fur and heavy horns. Reindeer, bison, wild horses, and predators. Dire wolves, cave lions, massive bears. It was a world full of life, but it was also harsh. Temperatures could drop far below freezing for long stretches of the year. Food could become scarce. Storms could appear suddenly. For most species, survival meant strength, thick fur, heavy fat layers, powerful bodies built to withstand cold. Humans had none of those advantages. They had something else, something quieter, something harder to see: curiosity and cooperation. Two qualities that would slowly shape the destiny of our species. Imagine a small group of humans standing beside a fire on a freezing night. The wind moves across the plain. Stars burn brightly overhead. Nearby, mammoths move like shadows across the snowy grasslands. The people gathered around the fire are talking softly, planning, remembering where herds passed last winter, sharing knowledge, passing ideas from one mind to another. That simple act, sharing information, would become one of humanity's greatest survival tools. Animals rely on instinct, but humans began relying on memory, stories, experience, each generation learning a little more than the last. Where to find shelter, how to track animals across frozen ground, how to shape stone into sharper edges. These lessons spread slowly from group to group, across valleys, across rivers, across entire continents. The Ice Age was difficult, but difficulty often creates opportunity. As glaciers reshaped the land, they also opened new paths. Sea levels dropped because so much water was locked inside ice sheets. This exposed enormous stretches of land that do not exist today. Bridges between continents, vast coastal plains, routes that early humans would eventually explore. At the time, of course, no one thought of it that way. To them, the world was simply what lay beyond the horizon, and every horizon carried risk, but also possibility. Perhaps one of the most fascinating things about Ice Age humans is how small their groups were. Most communities may have contained only 20 to 50 people, small bands moving through enormous landscapes. Their lives were deeply connected to the rhythms of animals and seasons. They followed migrations. They returned to familiar campsites. They watched the sky and the winds. Everything around them was a signal, a clue, a piece of information. And slowly, over thousands of years, humans became experts at reading the world around them, not through brute strength, but through attention, observation, patience. If a mammoth herd changed its migration route, humans noticed. If a river froze earlier than usual, they noticed. If certain plants survived harsh winters better than others, they noticed. This quiet awareness helped them survive conditions that wiped out many other species. But the story is still only beginning, because while early humans were learning to survive colder climates, the Ice Age itself was growing stronger. Glaciers continued expanding, temperatures continued dropping, and the challenges ahead would test human creativity in ways no species had faced before. Soon, humans would leave the lands where their ancestors first evolved. They would move into Europe, into Northern Asia, into regions where winter dominated most of the year, places where survival required entirely new strategies, new tools, new ideas. The Ice Age would shape everything, where people lived, what they ate, how they dressed, even how they thought. And somehow, against all odds, they would endure, quietly adapting, quietly learning. While many powerful creatures vanished from the earth, the small, curious species gathered around ancient fires would continue, watching, learning, surviving. And the long story of that survival is only just beginning. In the next part of our journey, we will step further back in time, to the early humans who first began facing the cooling world, to understand how their ancient roots prepared them for the greatest test their species would ever face. The coming of the Ice Age, slow, silent, unstoppable, and yet not impossible to survive. Long before the great glaciers spread across the northern world, before mammoths wandered the frozen plains, before humans ever saw snow-covered horizons stretching endlessly into the distance. Our story begins in warmth, a different Earth, a greener one. Millions of years ago, much of the planet was warmer than it is today. Forests spread across large continents. Rain fell regularly. Rivers ran through thick vegetation. Africa, in particular, was a place of constant change. Forests grew and shrank with shifting climates. Grasslands expanded and retreated. Lakes formed and vanished over thousands of years. It was here that the earliest human ancestors slowly emerged. They were not yet fully human, not in the way we imagine ourselves today. They walked upright much of the time, but their bodies were still adapting. Their brains were smaller. Their tools were simple. But something important had already begun. Curiosity. These early ancestors, species like Australopithecus, spent their days moving through woodland and open grasslands. They gathered fruit, they dug for roots, they watched animals, and slowly, across millions of years, evolution shaped their bodies and minds. Walking upright freed their hands. Free hands could carry food, or tools, and tools would change everything. The earliest known stone tools appear about 3.3 million years ago. They were simple, just stones, struck together to create a sharp edge. But even that simple act carried enormous meaning. It meant foresight. It meant understanding that an object could be changed to serve a purpose. A stone could become a knife. A rock could become a hammer. That small shift in thinking marked the beginning of humanity's long relationship with technology. At first, the tools were crude. Sharp flakes used to cut meat from bones. Hammerstones used to crack marrow. But over time, tools became more refined. By around 2 million years ago, a species called Homo erectus had appeared. They looked more familiar to us, taller, stronger, with longer legs built for walking great distances. Their brains were larger too, and they began making tools that required planning. The famous hand axe emerged during this period. It was shaped deliberately, symmetrical, balanced in the hand. A tool that could cut, scrape, or chop. Creating one required skill. It required patience. and perhaps even teaching. Somewhere, one human likely showed another how to strike stone just the right way. A quiet lesson passed between generations, and this sharing of knowledge slowly transformed human life. But tools were only part of the story. Another discovery changed survival even more profoundly: fire. At some point, likely around 1 million years ago, humans began controlling fire. Perhaps it began with lightning strikes that set grasslands ablaze. Early humans might have carried burning branches back to their camps, protecting the flames, feeding them slowly with dry wood. Fire brought warmth, it brought light. It kept predators away in the dark, but perhaps most importantly, it changed food. Cooking made meat easier to chew and digest. It released more energy from plants. It made tough roots and grains edible. Over time, cooked food likely helped support the growth of larger brains that required enormous amounts of energy. And with larger brains came more complex thinking. Communication improved, planning improved, social cooperation deepened. These early humans were still living mostly in Africa, but their world was slowly expanding. Around 1.8 million years ago, groups of Homo erectus began leaving Africa. Not all at once, not in a great migration, just small bands moving outward over generations, following rivers, following animals, following curiosity. Some moved into the Middle East, others spread across Asia, eventually reaching places as far away as Indonesia and China. The world they entered was varied: forests, mountains, savannas, different climates and ecosystems. And with every new environment came new challenges. Different animals to hunt, different plants to gather, different dangers to avoid. Adaptation became essential. The humans who survived were often the ones who could learn quickly, who could observe carefully, who could experiment. If a certain plant caused illness, they remembered. If a hunting method worked well, they repeated it. Slowly, human intelligence became a survival strategy. While other animals relied mostly on physical traits, humans relied on learning. And learning could happen faster than evolution. A fur coat might take thousands of years to evolve, but a warmer shelter could be built in a single afternoon. A new hunting technique could spread through a group within days. This flexibility gave humans a unique advantage, even before the Ice Age truly began, because by the time glaciers started expanding, humans were already travelers, already problem solvers, already innovators. But the Ice Age would still challenge them in ways they had never experienced, because cold environments demand different solutions, different clothing, different shelters, different food strategies. And eventually, a new kind of human would appear. One that many people have heard about: the Neanderthals. Neanderthals lived primarily in Europe and parts of Western Asia. They evolved from earlier human populations that had left Africa long before, and they were remarkably well adapted to cold climates. Their bodies were shorter and stockier. This shape helped conserve heat. Their noses were larger, possibly helping warm the cold air they breathed. They were incredibly strong, stronger than modern humans in many ways. Neanderthals were also intelligent. They made tools. They hunted large animals. They cared for injured members of their groups. Some archaeological evidence even suggests they buried their dead, which hints at emotional depth and social complexity. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals thrived in Ice Age Europe. They hunted mammoths and bison. They built shelters. They survived winters that would feel impossibly harsh to most of us today. Meanwhile, another human species was evolving back in Africa. Homo sapiens, our species. Modern humans appeared roughly 300,000 years ago. At first, they lived primarily in Africa, just like their ancestors. But they carried something slightly different. Brains that were shaped differently. Faces that were more delicate. Bodies that were slightly more slender. But perhaps most importantly, a remarkable ability to innovate. Their tools became more varied, more specialized. Their culture became richer. Art began to appear, symbols, beads, decoration. Signs that humans were thinking not only about survival, but also about meaning, identity, expression. And eventually, these humans would also begin leaving Africa. But when they did, they entered a world already deep in the Ice Age. Glaciers stretched across huge parts of the north. Winds swept across cold grasslands. Entire landscapes were shaped by ice and snow. And yet, humans did not retreat. They explored, they settled, they adapted. But adaptation in the Ice Age required something extraordinary. Not just tools, not just strength, but cooperation on a level rarely seen in the animal world. Groups had to share food, care for the young, protect the elderly, pass knowledge carefully from one generation to the next, because survival in the Ice Age was not guaranteed. One harsh winter could wipe out an entire group. One failed hunt could mean starvation. And yet, humans kept moving forward, across frozen valleys, across icy rivers, across enormous plains where the wind never seemed to stop blowing, slowly spreading across continents, learning the secrets of cold environments, learning how to live alongside mammoths and wolves, learning how to endure when so many other species could not. But the Ice Age still had many challenges ahead. The cold would grow deeper, the glaciers larger, the environments more unpredictable, and humans would soon face their first great test. A moment when survival would depend not just on intelligence, but on courage and cooperation. In the next section, we will explore the first major challenge Ice Age humans faced as they moved into colder lands, a turning point, a moment when humanity began proving that survival in the harshest climates was possible, if they could adapt quickly enough. There is a moment in every long story when curiosity meets reality. For early humans moving northward out of Africa, that moment arrived quietly, not with a sudden blizzard, not with a dramatic storm, but with something slower, a creeping cold that settled deeper into the land each year. At first, the difference may have seemed small. Cooler mornings, longer winters, grass that took longer to return in spring. But over generations, these subtle changes transformed entire landscapes. Forests began thinning. In many places, trees could no longer survive the colder temperatures. Instead, open plains spread across the land, windy, dry, and vast beyond imagination. This was the beginning of the great steppe lands of the Ice Age. For humans, the shift was both a challenge and an opportunity. Forests once offered protection, shelter from wind, wood for fires, plants for gathering. But open plains offered something else: animals, large herds of grazing creatures that moved slowly across the landscape in search of food. Horses, bison, reindeer, and of course, the mammoths. These massive animals were among the most important creatures of the Ice Age. Covered in thick fur and fat, mammoths thrived in cold environments. They traveled in herds, yet they knew where to find grasses buried beneath snow. And wherever mammoths went, humans followed, not recklessly, but carefully, patiently. Hunting animals as large as mammoths required skill. It required planning. It required cooperation. A single human standing alone would have no chance. But a coordinated group could succeed. Archaeological evidence suggests that early hunters learned to guide large animals into traps, sometimes toward cliffs, sometimes into muddy ground, sometimes into narrow valleys where escape was difficult. Once the animal was down, the work truly began. A mammoth could feed a group for weeks. Its meat provided food. Its fat provided energy. Its hide provided clothing and shelter. Its bones could be shaped into tools or structures. In the Ice Age, nothing was wasted. Every piece of an animal could be used. But hunting such large creatures carried risks. A wounded mammoth could be deadly. Even stepping too close to its massive legs could mean instant death. So humans learned patience. They observed herds carefully. They studied animal behavior. They learned when animals were strongest and when they were vulnerable. Winter was often the hardest season. Snow covered the ground. Plants disappeared beneath ice. Animals grew thinner as food became scarce. For humans, winter meant planning ahead. Food had to be stored. Shelters had to be strong. Clothing had to be warm enough to survive freezing winds. This was a new challenge, because early humans did not have thick fur. Their bodies were designed for warmer climates, so they invented solutions. Animal hides became clothing, carefully cleaned and wrapped around the body, sometimes stitched together with bone needles. These early garments may not have looked elegant, but they were effective. Layers of fur trapped warmth close to the skin, keeping the cold away. Fire also became more essential than ever. A campfire was not just a convenience, it was survival. Without fire, nights in Ice Age Europe or Northern Asia could become deadly. Temperatures could fall far below freezing, so humans protected fire carefully, carrying embers from camp to camp, learning how to spark flames using stone and dry grass. Fire gave warmth, it gave light, and it created a gathering place. Around the fire, people talked. They shared stories. They shared knowledge. This may seem like a small detail, but it was deeply important. Because during long winters, when hunting was difficult and darkness came early, communication strengthened communities. People planned together. They remembered past seasons. They prepared for the future. These quiet conversations around firelight slowly built a powerful advantage. Collective memory. Animals rely mostly on instinct, but humans relied on experience. If one generation discovered a better hunting route, the next generation could learn it. If someone discovered a safer winter shelter, that knowledge spread. Over time, human groups accumulated thousands of small insights about the land, where animals migrated, where water remained unfrozen, where caves offered protection from wind, and caves were especially valuable during the Ice Age. Across Europe and Asia, many early human camps have been discovered inside caves. These natural shelters protected people from snowstorms and freezing winds. They also held warmth from fires longer than open camps. Some caves show signs of human occupation lasting thousands of years. Layer upon layer of ash, stone tools, animal bones, traces of lives lived slowly across generations. Inside these caves, something remarkable also began to appear. Art. Deep in the darkness, far from sunlight, ancient humans painted animals on cave walls. Mammoths, horses, bison, sometimes entire scenes of movement and life. These paintings were not created for survival. They were something more. Expression, meaning, perhaps storytelling. perhaps spiritual reflection. No one knows exactly why these paintings were made, but their presence tells us something important. Even in the harshest environments, humans were not focused only on survival. They were also thinking, imagining, creating. This creativity may have been another key to their success, because creativity leads to problem solving, and problem solving helped humans survive Ice Age challenges. One of the biggest challenges was mobility. Human groups rarely stayed in one place permanently. Instead, they moved with the seasons. In summer, they followed animals northward as grasses grew. In winter, they returned to sheltered areas where conditions were less severe. These seasonal migrations required deep knowledge of the land. Paths had to be remembered, water sources located, dangerous regions avoided. Children had to be protected. Elders had to be supported. Moving through Ice Age landscapes was not easy. Snow could hide dangers. Ice could break beneath the weight of travelers. Storms could appear suddenly. But humans became skilled travelers. They learned how to read snow patterns, how to follow animal tracks, how to navigate using the sun and stars. Some researchers believe that Ice Age humans may have traveled hundreds of kilometers across familiar territories. Their world was large, but it was also deeply known to them. Every hill, every river, every valley carried meaning. Yet the Ice Age still held surprises, because climate during this period was not stable. Temperatures could change dramatically over centuries. Glaciers would advance, then retreat. Forests might briefly return to certain areas, only to disappear again when cold returned. These shifts forced humans to remain flexible. Groups that adapted quickly survived. Those that could not often disappeared. Some archaeological sites show clear evidence of abandoned camps, places where humans lived for generations, then suddenly left, perhaps because animals stopped migrating through the area, perhaps because glaciers advanced too close, perhaps because winters became too harsh. But even when groups vanished from certain regions, humans continued expanding elsewhere, across Asia, across Europe, across the Middle East. Eventually, humans would even reach lands that had never seen them before, places across frozen land bridges, places that today lie beneath oceans. But during the Ice Age, they were open plains waiting to be explored, and each new environment brought new lessons, new strategies, new ideas. Human survival was becoming something remarkable, not simply endurance, but adaptation, a quiet partnership between human intelligence and a changing world. And this partnership would soon face its greatest test yet, because the Ice Age was about to reach one of its coldest moments. Glaciers would grow larger than ever, temperatures would fall further, and the question of survival would become more urgent for every human group living in the north. But before that moment arrives, we must first understand how humans began transforming the very environment around them, not by changing the climate, but by changing how they lived within it, by building shelters, by mastering clothing, by learning to survive winters that once seemed impossible. And that is where our journey continues next. Imagine standing in the middle of the Ice Age. The air is still, cold enough that every breath feels sharp in your chest. A pale winter sun hangs low in the sky, barely warming the frozen ground below. Wind drifts slowly across wide plains of frost-covered grass. In the distance, dark shapes move through the snow. A herd of reindeer. Beyond them, the horizon stretches endlessly. This was the world many early humans learned to call home. not temporarily, not briefly, but for thousands of years. At first, survival in such a place would have seemed nearly impossible. Humans had evolved in warmer regions. Their bodies were not naturally equipped for extreme cold. They lacked thick fur. Their skin was exposed. Their children were especially vulnerable. Yet somehow, generation after generation managed to survive. The secret was not strength, and it was not speed. The secret was adaptation. A slow, thoughtful reshaping of daily life to match the demands of a colder Earth. The first challenge was shelter. On open Ice Age plains, wind could be relentless. Even a moderate wind could pull warmth from the body quickly, especially during winter nights when temperatures dropped far below freezing. So humans began creating shelters designed to trap warmth and block the wind. Sometimes they used natural features. Caves were especially valuable. Inside a cave, the temperature remained more stable than outside. Winds could not easily enter, and fires could warm the stone walls. Many Ice Age caves show signs of long-term human occupation. Ash from countless fires. Stone tools scattered across the floor. Bones of animals hunted and eaten. Life inside these caves must have been busy. Fires glowing softly in the darkness. People repairing tools. Children learning from older members of the group. Stories whispered in the flickering firelight. But caves were not always available. In the many parts of the Ice Age landscape, there were none. So humans built their own shelters. Some were made using wooden frames covered with animal hides. Others were even more remarkable. Archaeologists have discovered structures made from mammoth bones, large ribs and tusks arranged in circular shapes, covered with hides to create insulated walls. These homes were surprisingly effective. The bones formed strong frames that resisted heavy winds. The hides blocked cold air and helped retain warmth from fires burning inside. Inside such shelters, families could gather safely while storms raged outside. And storms were common during the Ice Age. Blizzards could sweep across the plains without warning. Snow piled high. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Travel became impossible. During these moments, survival depended entirely on preparation. Food stored in advance, shelters built carefully, fire maintained constantly. This is where another crucial adaptation appeared: clothing. Today, clothing seems ordinary. But during the Ice Age, warm clothing was one of the most important technologies humans ever developed. Early clothing likely began simply, animal skins wrapped around the body. But over time, humans refined their garments. They began sewing. Using bone needles and sinew threads, they stitched hides together to create fitted clothing. This made a huge difference. Loose hides allowed cold air to enter, but tailored clothing trapped warmth close to the body. Fur-lined garments became essential. Some garments may have included layers. Fur on the inside for insulation, tough outer hides to block wind and moisture. Footwear was especially important. Walking across frozen ground without protection could quickly lead to frostbite. So humans crafted primitive boots, often lined with soft fur to keep feet warm. Archaeologists have even found ancient sewing needles dating back more than 40,000 years. Tiny tools carefully shaped from bone. Their existence tells us something extraordinary. People were not only surviving, they were designing solutions, refining their techniques, improving comfort and protection. And these improvements spread through communities. A successful design could be copied, shared, passed down, This collective innovation helped humans survive conditions that would have overwhelmed many other animals. But clothing and shelter alone were not enough. Food remained the most constant concern. During warmer months, the Ice Age plains could be surprisingly rich with life. Grasses grew thick, herds of animals roamed widely, humans hunted, gathered plants, collected berries. But winter was different. Snow covered the ground, plants vanished, animals migrated or became harder to find. Food shortages could happen quickly, so humans developed strategies for preserving food. Meat could be dried in cold air, or frozen naturally by the environment. Fat could be stored in containers made from animal hides or stomachs. Some foods were buried in cold ground to keep them preserved. These early storage methods allowed humans to survive periods when fresh food was scarce. Another important adaptation involved hunting itself. Instead of relying on chance encounters, Ice Age humans became strategic hunters. They observed animal migrations closely. Many animals followed predictable seasonal routes. Reindeer, for example, moved in large herds across vast distances. By understanding these patterns, humans could position themselves along migration paths, waiting, watching, preparing traps. Sometimes they built simple barriers using stones or wooden stakes. These barriers guided animals toward narrow passages where hunters could attack more effectively. Group cooperation was essential. One group might drive animals forward. Another group waited ahead. Communication had to be clear. Timing had to be precise. These coordinated hunts required trust. Everyone depended on each other. If the hunt succeeded, the reward was enormous. A single large animal could feed dozens of people. If the hunt failed, hunger followed. But humans continued refining their methods, each generation learning from the last, each mistake becoming a lesson. Gradually, they became some of the most skilled hunters the Ice Age had ever seen. But survival was not only about hunting, it was also about understanding the environment itself. Ice Age landscapes were constantly shifting. Glaciers advanced and retreated. Rivers froze and thawed. Wind reshaped plains and valleys. Humans learned to read these changes carefully. Snow patterns could reveal animal tracks. Cloud formations hinted at incoming storms. The direction of the wind might signal seasonal shifts. This environmental awareness became deeply embedded in human culture. Children likely learned these skills from a very young age. Watching adults track animals, listening to stories about dangerous regions, observing how elders predicted weather changes. Knowledge was survival. And unlike physical strength, knowledge could be shared. One person's discovery could benefit the entire group. This collective intelligence became one of humanity's greatest strengths, perhaps even more powerful than tools, because tools can break, but ideas endure, ideas spread, ideas evolve. And during the Ice Age, the exchange of ideas may have been the most valuable resource of all. Groups sometimes met each other across the landscape, sharing tools, trading materials, exchanging information about hunting grounds or safe travel routes. These interactions helped spread new technologies faster. A new spear design might travel hundreds of kilometers across generations. Better clothing techniques might spread between communities. In this way, Ice Age humans slowly built networks of shared knowledge across continents, quiet connections between distant groups. And as these networks grew stronger, human survival became more stable, more reliable, even in a frozen world. But the Ice Age was not finished testing humanity. because climate during this period was unpredictable. Temperatures could shift dramatically. Some periods became slightly warmer, others plunged into deep cold. The greatest cold of the Ice Age was still approaching, a moment scientists now call the last glacial maximum. Around 26,000 years ago, glaciers would reach their largest size. Vast portions of the northern world would become buried beneath ice. Entire regions would become uninhabitable. Human populations would shrink. Groups would migrate. Some cultures would vanish completely. And yet, even during the coldest moment of the Ice Age, humans did not disappear. They adapted again, learning new survival strategies, inventing new tools, strengthening their communities, and proving once more that intelligence and cooperation could overcome even the harshest conditions on Earth. In the next section, we will explore the survival strategies that allowed humans to endure the coldest period of the Ice Age. Strategies built from patience, ingenuity, and the quiet determination to keep going, even when the world itself seemed frozen. By the time the Ice Age reached its coldest point, the Earth had changed in ways that would feel almost alien to us today. Glaciers stretched across northern continents like slow-moving mountains of ice. In some places, they were more than 3 kilometers thick. Where cities now stand, there were frozen deserts. Where forests once grew, there were windswept plains of snow and dust. And yet, humans remained, not everywhere. Large parts of northern Europe and North America were simply too cold. But in the regions just beyond the great ice sheets, small human communities continue to live. These places are sometimes called Ice Age refuges, areas where the climate, though harsh, was still survivable. Southern Europe, parts of the Middle East, Central Asia, small pockets of land where animals still roamed and rivers still flowed. Here, humans practiced the quiet strategies that allowed their species to endure. None of these strategies were dramatic. There were no sudden inventions that changed everything overnight. Instead, survival depended on 1,000 small decisions made every single day: where to travel, when to hunt, how to store food, who to trust. The first strategy was mobility. Humans during the Ice Age rarely stayed in one place for long. Their lives followed the rhythms of the land. When animals migrated, humans followed. When seasons changed, camps moved. These movements were not random. They were deeply understood patterns. Some groups traveled along the same routes year after year, crossing familiar rivers, returning to known shelters, visiting hunting ground that their ancestors had used for generations. These seasonal journeys could cover hundreds of kilometers, but the travelers knew the landscape well. They knew where fresh water could be found, where valleys provided shelter from winter winds, where herds were most likely to pass. This deep geographical knowledge was essential. Without it, wandering across the Ice Age plains would have been incredibly dangerous, because the environment could be unforgiving. Storms could appear suddenly. Food could disappear unexpectedly. And sometimes, entire animal migrations shifted. If a herd changed its route, a hunting group might suddenly find itself without food. So humans learned to watch carefully, to notice small signs, the direction of animal tracks, the pattern of grazing on grasses, the distant sounds of moving herds. Every clue mattered. The second strategy was sharing. In modern life, survival is often individual. But Ice Age survival was collective. If one hunter succeeded, everyone ate. If someone was injured, the group helped them recover. Archaeologists have discovered human skeletons from this time showing healed injuries that would have made hunting impossible. Broken legs, severe fractures. In modern wilderness conditions, such injuries might mean death. But these individuals survived, sometimes for years, which means their communities cared for them, brought them food, protected them. This kind of social cooperation gave humans a powerful advantage over many other species. Animals often struggle to support injured members, but humans built communities where survival was shared, and this sharing extended to knowledge. Stories passed down lessons about dangerous animals, about hidden water sources, about safe travel routes. Around fires during long winter nights, elders likely told stories that carried practical wisdom. Where to find shelter during sudden storms, which plants could be eaten during lean seasons, which valleys held migrating animals. These stories were more than entertainment. They were survival manuals passed through generations. The third strategy was food diversity. Many people imagine Ice Age humans hunting mammoths constantly. But in reality, mammoth hunts were rare. Large animals were valuable but difficult to catch. Instead, human diets were varied. Smaller animals were often more reliable: rabbits, birds, fish, reptiles. In some regions, humans trapped small mammals using simple snares. These animals required less risk to capture. Plants also remained important. Even during the Ice Age, hardy plants survived in sheltered areas. Roots could be dug from frozen ground. Seeds could be collected during warmer seasons and stored. Berries might appear briefly in summer. These foods added vital nutrients, and sometimes they made the difference between survival and starvation. Another clever strategy involved fat. Fat is extremely valuable in cold climates. It provides energy. It helps maintain body warmth. Ice Age hunters paid special attention to fatty parts of animals. Bone marrow was especially prized. Marrow could be extracted by cracking open long bones with stones. It was rich in calories and easy to digest. Fat deposits from animals were also stored carefully. These precious reserves helped sustain people during lean winter months. But perhaps the most remarkable survival strategy involved something less visible. Social networks. Human groups were small, often only a few dozen people. But they were not completely isolated. Groups sometimes met other communities during seasonal movements. These encounters allowed the exchange of tools, materials, and ideas. A group living near a river might trade fish or shells. Another group might share stone tools made from rare minerals. Some materials traveled astonishing distances. Obsidian tools found in archaeological sites sometimes originated hundreds of kilometers away. This means information and trade networks stretched far across Ice Age landscapes. These connections provided an important safety net. If one region experienced food shortages, people might travel toward neighboring groups. If a new hunting method was discovered, it could spread across multiple communities. These quiet networks strengthened human resilience, because survival no longer depended only on one small group. It depended on a larger web of shared knowledge and cooperation. Another survival advantage came from planning ahead. Animals react to immediate conditions. Humans began thinking further into the future. Hunters stored tools for later seasons. Communities remembered where good shelter could be found during storms. Food was preserved whenever possible. These preparations helped reduce the risk of sudden environmental change. because the Ice Age climate could shift quickly. Some years were colder, some brought unexpected droughts, some altered animal migrations entirely, but humans adapted, slowly learning to anticipate these changes. And perhaps most importantly, humans developed patience. Ice Age survival often required waiting for herds, waiting for storms to pass, waiting for seasons to change. During these quiet moments, people observed the world around them carefully. They noticed patterns. They experimented with tools. They refined their clothing and shelters. These gradual improvements accumulated over generations. No single invention saved humanity during the Ice Age. Instead, survival came from countless small adjustments: better clothing, better hunting coordination, better understanding of the land. Each improvement made life a little easier, a little safer, and slowly, humans became one of the most adaptable species the Earth had ever known. But adaptation did not stop there, because alongside survival strategies, something else was growing stronger: human culture. Tools were becoming more specialized. Art was becoming more common. Social bonds were deepening. And these cultural developments would soon become just as important as hunting or shelter, because culture allowed humans to pass knowledge faster than ever before, turning each generation into teachers for the next. And that quiet accumulation of knowledge would soon reshape the entire human experience. In the next section, we will explore the tools, traditions, and cultural innovations that helped humans not just survive the Ice Age, but begin shaping the future of our species. As the Ice Age continued, something subtle but powerful was unfolding within human communities. Survival was no longer only about reacting to the environment. Humans were beginning to shape their world more actively, not by changing the climate, not by controlling nature, but by refining the tools, traditions, and relationships that allowed them to live within it. Across frozen plains and rocky valleys, human technology slowly grew more sophisticated. Stone tools had existed for millions of years, but during the Ice Age, they became far more specialized. Instead of a few simple cutting stones, humans began creating toolkits. Different tools for different tasks: sharp blades for slicing meat, scrapers for cleaning animal hides, burins for carving bone and wood, stone points carefully shaped for spears. Each tool required skill to produce. Stone had to be selected carefully. A good toolmaker looked for rocks that fractured in predictable ways: flint, chert, obsidian. These stones could break into sharp edges when struck correctly. Toolmaking itself became an art. A skilled knapper could shape stone with careful taps of a hammerstone. Flakes would peel away in controlled patterns. Bit by bit, a tool emerged, balanced, sharp, purposeful. This knowledge was not instinctive. It had to be learned. And learning meant teaching. Perhaps a young person sat beside an elder, watching each strike of stone, listening to quiet instructions, trying again and again, until their hands understood the rhythm. These lessons may have lasted hours or days, but eventually new toolmakers emerged, and the knowledge continued. But stone was only part of the story. Ice Age humans also began working with bone, antler, and ivory. These materials allowed for tools that stone alone could not create. Bone needles, for example, were delicate and precise. Some were so finely shaped that their eyes, the small holes for thread, were barely wider than a grain of rice. With these needles, humans could sew clothing far more effectively than before. Fitted garments, layered garments, clothing designed not just for warmth, but for comfort and flexibility. Antler and bone were also shaped into spear tips and harpoons. These tools could pierce thick animal hides. They were strong, yet lightweight, perfect for hunting in harsh environments. Perhaps one of the most important innovations was the development of projectile weapons. Early hunters often used thrusting spears. These required getting dangerously close to large animals. But later tools allowed hunters to strike from greater distances, throwing spears, and eventually devices like the atlatl, a spear-throwing lever that increased the speed and force of a thrown weapon. These tools gave hunters greater safety, greater accuracy, greater success. But tools alone cannot explain human survival, because tools require cooperation. A single hunter cannot bring down a mammoth, but a coordinated group can. And Ice Age communities were deeply cooperative. Each person likely had roles within the group. Some were hunters, others prepared hides, others gathered plants, some watched children, some maintained fires. Every task mattered, every role supported survival. And over time, these roles may have shaped the earliest forms of human culture. Because culture is not just art or music. It is the shared habits that guide how people live together, when to move camps, how to share food, how to treat elders, how to welcome strangers. Even small traditions, like where people sit around a fire, can become part of cultural identity. Ice Age culture also included something remarkable: art. Across caves in Europe and Asia, ancient paintings still survive. They appear suddenly in the archaeological record around 40,000 years ago. Horses galloping across stone walls, bison painted in deep ochre reds, mammoths drawn with careful lines. Sometimes entire herds appeared to move across the cave surfaces. The artists used natural pigments, crushed minerals, charcoal from fires, clay mixed with animal fat. These colors were applied with fingers, brushes made from hair, or even blown through hollow bones to create soft sprays. The results are astonishing. Even today, the animals look alive. Muscles tense, heads lowered, legs mid-stride. Why did Ice Age humans create these paintings? No one knows for certain. Some scientists believe they were connected to hunting rituals. Perhaps painting animals helped hunters focus their intentions. Others believe the caves held spiritual meaning, places where humans connected with something beyond everyday life. But regardless of the reason, the paintings show something extraordinary. Humans were not only surviving, they were imagining, they were telling stories, they were expressing ideas through symbols and images. This ability to create meaning may have strengthened human communities. Shared stories create shared identity. They bind people together. They help groups remember who they are. And identity matters during difficult times, because when the world becomes harsh and uncertain, people need something stable, something constant. Culture can provide that stability. Even small objects carried meaning. Archaeologists have discovered beads made from shells and animal teeth. Some were worn as necklaces. Others were sewn onto clothing. These decorations served no survival function, but they likely communicated identity. Perhaps they showed which group a person belonged to. Perhaps they marked achievements, or simply personal expression. Even in the coldest landscapes on Earth, humans found ways to celebrate beauty. Music may have existed too. Ancient bone flutes discovered in caves suggest that humans were creating melodies tens of thousands of years ago. Imagine a quiet night inside an Ice Age shelter, snow falling softly outside. a small fire glowing in the center. Someone lifts a bone flute and begins to play. The sound echoes gently through the shelter, simple notes, soft and steady. For a moment, the harsh world outside fades, and people remember that they are not just survivors. They are human. These moments may have strengthened emotional bonds within groups, reducing stress, building trust, creating unity. Unity was essential because Ice Age survival required deep cooperation. Without cooperation, small groups would struggle. But together, humans could overcome enormous challenges. And over time, something fascinating happened. Human groups became better connected. Ideas traveled, technology spread, cultural traditions crossed long distances. This quiet network of knowledge allowed humans to adapt faster than any other species. If one group discovered a better way to sew clothing, others eventually learned. If new hunting techniques appeared, they spread across landscapes. The Ice Age world was vast, but human knowledge was slowly connecting it. And this growing intelligence, shared across generations, would soon lead to discoveries that changed our understanding of human history. Because scientists today are still uncovering clues about how humans truly survived the Ice Age, through fossils, through ancient DNA, through tools buried deep beneath the soil. Each discovery reveals new insights into how our ancestors lived, how they adapted, and how their survival shaped the future of our species. In the next section, we will explore the scientific discoveries that are helping us understand the Ice Age in greater detail. Clues hidden in bones, in ancient climates, and even inside our own DNA. Clues that tell the quiet story of how humans endured while so many other species disappeared. For most of human history, the Ice Age was only a distant memory, a time so ancient that its details faded into mystery. People found strange bones buried in the ground, massive tusks, huge skulls unlike anything living in the modern world. Stories grew around these discoveries. Some believed the bones belonged to giants, others thought they were remains of mythical beasts. But slowly, science began uncovering the truth. Piece by piece, researchers started reconstructing the story of the Ice Age, and with every discovery, the mystery of human survival became clearer. One of the most important clues came from the ice itself. Deep in places like Greenland and Antarctica, enormous glaciers have preserved a record of Earth's climate. Scientists drill long cylinders of ice called ice cores. These cores contain layers of snow that fell year after year, sometimes stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Each layer traps tiny bubbles of ancient air. Inside those bubbles are the gases that filled Earth's atmosphere long ago. By studying these samples, scientists can measure past temperatures. They can see how climate changed across thousands of years. The results are remarkable. Ice cores show that the Ice Age was not one long, steady freeze. Instead, it was a series of shifting cold and warm periods. Temperatures rose and fell many times, sometimes warming for centuries, sometimes plunging suddenly into deep cold. For humans living through these shifts, the environment must have felt unpredictable. A valley that supported animals for generations might suddenly become barren. A region once covered in grass might become frozen desert. These climate swings forced humans to remain flexible. Communities that adapted quickly survived. Those that could not often disappeared. But ice cores are only one piece of the puzzle. Another powerful source of information comes from fossils. When archaeologists uncover ancient campsites, they find traces of daily life. Stone tools scattered across ancient ground surfaces, animal bones showing marks from cutting tools, ash from fires long extinguished. These clues reveal how humans hunted, cooked, and lived. But fossils also tell stories about the animals around them. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer. Some of these creatures thrived during cold periods. Their thick fur and fat helped them survive harsh winters. Yet many eventually vanished. This leads to one of the great scientific debates surrounding the Ice Age. Why did so many large animals disappear? Some researchers believe climate change played the biggest role. As temperatures warmed toward the end of the Ice Age, habitats changed quickly. Cold-adapted animals lost the environments they depended on. Others believe humans may have contributed, not necessarily through massive hunting campaigns, but through gradual pressure. If humans hunted large animals regularly, even small population losses could accumulate over centuries, especially for animals that reproduce slowly. The truth may involve both factors, climate change and human activity working together. But interestingly, humans themselves did not vanish. Despite living in the same changing environments, they endured. And part of that answer may lie in something hidden inside our bodies: DNA. Over the past few decades, scientists have developed ways to study ancient DNA from bones that are tens of thousands of years old. These genetic traces allow researchers to understand how ancient humans were related. They reveal migrations across continents. They even show moments when different human species met and interbred. One of the most fascinating discoveries involves Neanderthals. For many years, scientists assumed Neanderthals disappeared completely, but genetic research revealed something surprising. People living today outside Africa still carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, usually around 1 to 2%. This means that when modern humans moved into Europe and Asia, they did not simply replace Neanderthals. They interacted. They had children together. Their genes blended. Some of those genes remain within us today. Interestingly, certain Neanderthal genes may have helped modern humans adapt to colder climates. Traits affecting skin, immune systems, and fat metabolism appear linked to Neanderthal ancestry. In a quiet way, the survival strategies of Neanderthals may still live within our biology. But Neanderthals were not the only other humans living during the Ice Age. Another mysterious group, called the Denisovans, lived in parts of Asia. We know them mostly from fragments of bone and DNA found in caves. Yet their genetic influence also remains in some modern populations, particularly among people in parts of Asia and Oceania. These discoveries reveal that the human story during the Ice Age was not simple. It was not just one species struggling alone. It was a complex web of related human groups. Different species, different cultures, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating, sometimes blending together. Another scientific tool helping us understand the Ice Age is isotope analysis. This technique examines tiny chemical differences in bones and teeth. These differences reveal what ancient humans ate, where they traveled, even what kinds of environments they lived in. For example, certain isotopes appear more frequently in marine foods. Others are linked to grazing animals from open plains. By analyzing these chemical clues, scientists can reconstruct ancient diets. And what they have discovered is fascinating. Many Ice Age humans consumed large amounts of animal protein, but they also ate fish, plants, and even insects when available. Their diets were flexible, adaptable, and that flexibility may have been one of their greatest strengths. Animals that rely on a narrow range of foods can struggle when environments change, but humans could shift their diets as conditions shifted. Another remarkable discovery involves the tools themselves. By studying microscopic wear patterns on ancient stone tools, scientists can determine how they were used. Some tools show marks from cutting meat, others from scraping hides. Some even show traces of plant fibers. Each scratch on a stone blade tells part of the story, a quiet record of human activity from tens of thousands of years ago. Even footprints preserved in ancient mud have provided insights. In some locations, scientists have found fossilized human footprints alongside animal tracks. These scenes freeze moments from the distant past. Children walking beside adults, hunters following mammoth tracks, entire groups moving across landscapes now lost to time. These fragile traces remind us that Ice Age humans were not abstract figures in history. They were real people, families, communities, parents guiding children across frozen plains, friends sharing meals beside glowing fires, people who laughed, who worried, who hoped for safe winters and successful hunts. And through all these discoveries, one truth becomes clearer. Human survival during the Ice Age was not the result of a single advantage. It was the combination of many small strengths: intelligence, cooperation, creativity, adaptability. Together, these qualities formed a powerful survival strategy. And over thousands of years, those strategies allowed humans to expand farther and farther across the planet, into places no human had ever seen before, across continents connected by frozen land bridges, across valleys carved by glaciers, across deserts of ice and wind. In the next section, we will follow those journeys, exploring how Ice Age humans spread across the world, reaching new lands, crossing into continents that would one day become home to millions. Quiet migrations that slowly reshaped the human story forever. By the time the Ice Age reached its later chapters, humans had already proven something remarkable. They could survive in cold. They could adapt to unfamiliar landscapes. And perhaps most importantly, they could travel, not in great armies, not in organized expeditions, but slowly, quietly, one small group at a time, across generations. As glaciers locked enormous amounts of water into ice sheets, the oceans themselves changed. Sea levels dropped, sometimes by more than 120 meters. And when the seas fell, something extraordinary appeared. Land. Vast stretches of land that do not exist today. Coastal plains extended far outward. Islands became connected. And between Asia and North America, an enormous region emerged, a place scientists now call Beringia. Today, the Bering Strait separates Siberia and Alaska with cold ocean waters. But during the Ice Age, this region was different. Instead of ocean, there was a broad land bridge, hundreds of kilometers wide, a cold but fertile plain, covered with grasses and scattered shrubs. Animals crossed it freely: mammoths, bison, horses, caribou, and eventually humans. But this journey likely did not happen all at once. Instead, it unfolded slowly over thousands of years. Human groups living in northeastern Asia gradually moved farther east, following familiar animals, exploring new hunting grounds. The land beneath their feet simply continued. They may not have realized they were entering a new continent. To them, it was just another valley, another plain, another horizon waiting to be explored. Beringia itself may have supported human populations for long periods. The region was not covered by glaciers. Instead, it formed a cold but livable grassland. Some researchers believe human groups may have lived there for thousands of years before continuing into North America. Life in Beringia would have required the same careful strategies practiced elsewhere in the Ice Age: mobility, observation, cooperation. Winters were harsh, but summers brought grazing animals and bursts of plant growth. Human communities followed the rhythms of the land, moving camps with the seasons, hunting migrating herds, gathering what the short, warm months allowed. Eventually, some of these groups moved farther, southward into North America. But here they encountered a challenge. Large glaciers covered much of Canada. Two enormous ice sheets, the Laurentide and the Cordilleran, blocked much of the continent. Yet ice is rarely perfect. Over time, natural corridors opened between these massive glaciers. Narrow pathways of land, cold, rocky, but passable. And through these corridors, small groups of humans slowly entered new territory. The landscapes they encountered were unlike anything their ancestors had known. Huge plains stretched across what is now the American Midwest. Massive animals roamed the land: giant ground sloths, short-faced bears, Columbian mammoths, American camels and horses. For human hunters, these new lands offered opportunity, but also uncertainty. Every ecosystem required new knowledge, new hunting strategies, new seasonal patterns to understand. And yet humans adapted once again. Archaeological sites across North America reveal evidence of these early settlers: stone tools, animal bones, campfire remains. Each discovery marks a moment when humans stood in a place no member of their species had stood before, watching unfamiliar animals move across unfamiliar landscapes, learning, experimenting, adapting. Meanwhile, other human groups continued spreading across the Old World, across Europe, across Central Asia, into the cold highlands of Siberia. In some places, humans reached astonishing environments: the high altitudes of the Tibetan Plateau, the deep forests of Eastern Asia. Each environment required new survival skills: clothing suitable for colder winds, shelters designed for different terrain, hunting strategies adapted to local animals. The Ice Age forced humans to become environmental experts. Every region had its own rhythms, its own rules, and those who learned them survived. But travel was not always easy. Distances between groups could be enormous. Communication across these vast landscapes was limited. Yet human communities found ways to maintain connections. Trade routes emerged slowly. Materials like obsidian or rare stones traveled hundreds of kilometers. Shells from coastal regions appeared in inland camps. These objects moved from group to group through quiet exchanges, sometimes through friendships, sometimes through shared gatherings during seasonal migrations. These interactions spread ideas as well. A new tool design might move across continents over generations. A better sewing technique might spread quietly between distant communities. Human culture was becoming a network, invisible threads connecting scattered groups across enormous distances, and these connections strengthened human survival. Because knowledge traveled faster than individuals. Even when people remained in small communities, they were not completely isolated. Their ideas could move, their innovations could spread. And so, slowly, humans filled the spaces between glaciers, the valleys, the plains, the coastlines. Everywhere they went, they carried their quiet survival strategies with them. Fire, tools, stories, memory, and perhaps most importantly, curiosity. Curiosity drove humans forward, beyond familiar lands, beyond safe territories, toward new horizons. Some groups eventually reached the far southern regions of South America. Others settled along the coasts of Asia. Still others remained in familiar regions of Europe and the Middle East. But across the world, one pattern remained the same. Humans adapted. They did not dominate the Ice Age. They lived within it, carefully, respectfully, learning the rhythms of a cold and unpredictable planet. But even the Ice Age could not last forever. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the climate began changing once again. Glaciers that had dominated continents for thousands of years began retreating. Temperatures rose. Forests slowly returned. Rivers swelled with melting ice. And these changes would transform human life yet again. Because survival during the Ice Age shaped something deeper within our species. Traits that would influence everything that came after. How we cooperate, how we innovate, how we respond to change. In the next section, we will explore how Ice Age survival shaped human evolution itself, not just physically, but mentally, socially, and culturally, leaving lasting marks on the species we have become. When we think about evolution, we often imagine physical changes, stronger limbs, sharper teeth, thicker fur. But the Ice Age shaped humans in a different way, not just through the body, but through the mind. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in environments that demanded careful thinking, planning, patience, cooperation. And over time, these demands helped refine the qualities that define humanity today. Imagine the daily life of an Ice Age community. Nothing could be taken for granted. Food required effort. Shelter required effort. Even warmth required effort. A fire had to be maintained constantly. If it went out during winter, starting another one could take precious time. So someone always watched the flames. Someone always gathered fuel. Every task mattered, and every person mattered. This environment favored groups that worked well together. Selfish behavior could weaken the group, but cooperation strengthened it. If hunters shared their success, everyone survived. If knowledge was passed freely, mistakes became lessons. Over generations, communities built cultures that valued cooperation, sharing food, protecting the young, caring for elders who carried knowledge. These behaviors were not just kindness, they were survival strategies, because a community with strong bonds could endure hardship better than isolated individuals. This may have helped shape something unique about humans: our deep capacity for social connection, the ability to trust strangers, the desire to help others, even empathy. All of these qualities strengthened cooperation, and cooperation strengthened Ice Age survival. But the Ice Age also rewarded intelligence, not necessarily the kind measured by modern tests, but practical intelligence, the ability to read the environment, to notice patterns, to remember important details, where animals migrated last year, where a certain valley offered shelter from winter winds, which plants grew even during colder seasons. This environmental awareness became deeply embedded in human thinking. Some researchers believe that Ice Age life strengthened our ability to imagine the future. Planning was essential. Hunters needed to anticipate animal movements. Communities needed to prepare for winter months long before snow arrived. This kind of forward thinking may have helped shape the human brain's capacity for long-term planning. Another mental skill refined during the Ice Age was storytelling. At first glance, storytelling might seem like entertainment, but in ancient communities, stories carried information. A story about a dangerous valley might warn future travelers. A story about a successful hunt might teach hunting strategies. Stories made knowledge memorable. They turned lessons into narratives that children could understand. And when stories are shared around a fire, they also strengthen community bonds. Everyone listens. Everyone remembers. Over time, storytelling may have become one of the most powerful ways humans preserve knowledge. Even today, stories remain central to human culture. From ancient myths to modern books and films, the roots of that tradition may stretch back to Ice Age fires. But human evolution during the Ice Age was not purely mental. There were physical adaptations as well. Populations living in colder climates gradually developed traits that help conserve heat. Stockier body shapes help retain warmth. Different skin tones evolved depending on sunlight levels. Metabolism adjusted to diets rich in animal fat and protein. These adaptations happened slowly over many generations, but perhaps the most important evolutionary advantage humans developed was flexibility. Unlike many animals, humans can live in an astonishing range of environments: tropical forests, high mountains, Arctic tundra, deserts. This flexibility comes from culture as much as biology. Tools, clothing, shelter, knowledge. All of these allow humans to adjust their environment rather than relying solely on physical traits. And that flexibility first proved its value during the Ice Age. Because Ice Age climates were unpredictable, sometimes warming slightly, sometimes plunging into extreme cold. Animals had to adapt through slow evolutionary change, but humans could adapt through learning. If a region became too harsh, they moved. If hunting methods failed, they tried new ones. If clothing was not warm enough, they improved it. This adaptability allowed humans to survive changes that wiped out many other species. But the Ice Age also had another effect. It encouraged exploration. When environments shifted, humans had to search for new resources, new hunting grounds, new rivers, new valleys. Over time, this constant movement expanded human territory across the planet. Curiosity became a survival trait. Those willing to explore new landscapes often discovered new opportunities. And those discoveries spread through communities, not with glaciers suddenly vanishing overnight. Instead, the change unfolded the same way the Ice Age itself had begun. Gradually, quietly, almost unnoticed at first. Year by year, temperatures began to rise. Glaciers that had dominated entire continents started to retreat. Ice that had once seemed eternal began melting back into rivers and seas. And as the ice withdrew, the world revealed new landscapes. Forests returned, grasslands shifted. Rivers carved fresh paths through valleys once buried beneath frozen mountains. Animals adapted to the changing climate. Some moved north, following the cooler temperatures. Others struggled to survive in the warming world. And some, like the great mammoths that had roamed the steppe for thousands of years, slowly disappeared. But humans remained, just as they had remained through the coldest centuries of the Ice Age, through storms and migrations, through scarcity and uncertainty. By the time the climate warmed enough for forests to spread widely again, humans had already learned something remarkable: how to live almost anywhere. The skills they developed during the Ice Age did not vanish when the glaciers melted. They carried forward, careful observation of nature, sharing knowledge across generations, working together in communities, adapting quickly to changing environments. These habits had become deeply embedded in human culture. The Ice Age had been a long test, and humanity had passed it, not through dominance, but through adaptability. Because in truth, humans never conquered the Ice Age. They simply learned how to live within it, patiently, respectfully, listening to the rhythms of the land. And when the cold finally faded, those lessons followed them into a new world. In the warmer landscape that emerged, humans began experimenting with new ways of living. Some communities discovered that plants could be grown intentionally. Seeds saved from one season could be planted in the next. Gradually, the earliest forms of agriculture appeared. Small gardens, then larger fields. Animals that were once hunted began to be domesticated. Sheep, goats, cattle. These changes unfolded slowly, just like the changes that shaped the Ice Age itself. But something deeper remained constant. The human ability to adapt, because agriculture itself required many of the same skills that Ice Age survival had demanded. Planning ahead, observing seasonal cycles, working together in communities, and sharing knowledge across generations. The Ice Age had prepared humanity for these transformations. Without those thousands of years of learning, perhaps early farming societies would not have emerged as successfully. But even beyond agriculture, the Ice Age left another legacy, a legacy inside the human mind. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in environments where survival depended on cooperation, where sharing food meant protecting the entire group, where knowledge passed from elders to children ensured the future. These habits shaped human society. They helped create the deep social bonds that still define our species today. Even in the modern world, echoes of those ancient survival strategies remain. We gather around tables instead of fires. We share stories. We teach our children the lessons we have learned. We work together to face challenges. In many ways, the habits that carried humans through the Ice Age still guide us. But perhaps the most important lesson from that ancient time is something quieter: humility. Because when we look back at the Ice Age, we see how small humanity once was. Tiny groups scattered across enormous landscapes. No cities, no machines, no technology beyond stone, bone, and fire. And yet, those small groups endured conditions that might seem unimaginable today. They faced winters colder than anything most modern people experience. They crossed landscapes that offered little comfort. They adapted again and again as the world around them shifted. Their survival was not guaranteed, but their determination carried them forward. And slowly, across thousands of years, those small communities became the ancestors of everyone alive today. Every person living now carries a piece of that ancient resilience. Inside our biology, inside our culture, inside the quiet instinct to adapt when circumstances change. The Ice Age reminds us that humanity's greatest strength has never been brute force. It has always been adaptability, the ability to learn, to cooperate, to imagine new solutions when old ones fail. Those qualities allowed humans to survive the frozen world of the past, and they may be just as important for the future. Because the Earth has always changed. Ice ages begin and end. Climates shift. Landscapes transform. Life evolves. And through it all, humans have continued moving forward, learning, adjusting, adapting, just as our ancestors did, when they followed mammoths across frozen plains, or gathered quietly around fires during long winter nights. If we could visit those ancient camps now, we might see something surprisingly familiar. A group of people sitting together beneath a sky filled with stars, talking softly, sharing food, watching the fire glow in the darkness. Outside, the wind moves across the frozen land, but inside the circle of warmth, something deeply human remains: connection, curiosity, hope for the next day. Those quiet moments, repeated across thousands of years, carried humanity through the Ice Age. And perhaps they still carry us forward today. So when we think about the frozen world of our distant past, we should not only imagine glaciers and mammoths. We should also imagine the small groups of humans who endured it, patient, observant, working together step by step across thousands of winters, until the ice finally melted and a new chapter of human history began.